Hey everybody, look, it's a Monday and we're actually back. So I am so freaking excited, y'all. The funding period ended on the 8th, so 2 days ago for the calendar project, and we doubled our funding goal. Artemophilos and I are absolutely beyond thrilled. So what that means for those of you who backed, I put out a backer announcement recently. For those of you who did back, the wall calendars, I submitted the proof to the publisher yesterday. I approved the proof the publisher sent back today. They said that they're going to try to get me the wall calendars by the 18th. So that's the current delivery estimate for them. I am so beyond thrilled. You guys don't even understand how freaking gorgeous this is. For those of you who backed for PDFs, I just sent the backer surveys out. The PDFs are going to be going out as soon as the funds hit my account. So that'll be in about 2 weeks from the 8th, so around the 22nd. I'll be mailing out the wall calendars around the same time because I have all the shipping materials and stuff. I'm just waiting for the calendars to actually get here. And I want to make sure that I pay the artist like the rest of their fee before I actually, ship out their hard work to the world. I want to make sure I've actually secured the contract and finished that. Artemophilos has agreed to do next year. So for those of you who have answered your backer surveys to get on the waiting list or the mailing list, that's already all set up. So the funding goal for next year will probably be toward the end of next year. It will just be for printing fees. I actually was able to pay Artemophilos completely in advance for next year's calendar, just off of the incredible generosity of the community this year for this project. So thank you all so freaking much for your help with that campaign. There were 50 donors. I cannot believe it was this successful. So I'm so freaking blown away. So thank you guys so much for all of that. That said, we have an incredible guest that I have actually been attempting to court to come onto the channel off and on for about 3 months. But the problem was, about the time that I first reached out, then the stuff with first getting my house rewired happened, and then I got sick. So it has been and then the first time we scheduled the interview, we're like, okay, it's going to happen. And then suddenly emergency jaw surgery and infection and wisdom tooth and blah. So this has been in the process of trying to happen for months. I am so excited to have Fel here. Actually, I was kind of blown away when we first met because she mentioned to me that my work kind of inspired that. So I'm gonna let you introduce yourself because your work is incredible. If you guys are not subscribed and you're Hellenists, the stuff that is done over on that channel is comparable to the stuff that I do here, and a diversity of opinions is absolutely necessary in this community. If you're a Hellenist or you're interested in Hellenist content, please go check their stuff out. It's freaking incredible. So go on, Fel. Feel free to introduce yourself. Let everybody know all about your amazingness because I'm so excited to finally have you here.
Yes, okay. So I'm Fel the Blithe. I'm another Hellenic Polytheist YouTuber here. There's only a handful.
There are three of us that are not focused that I know of. I'm kind of four if you count Pastel Priestess, but Pastel Priestess is kind of more like eclectic witchy in my experience.
I also don't think she's posted anything in a really long time.
Yeah, I think she still has her podcast.
Yeah, she does, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I started YouTube less than a year ago.
I completely agree, Astrid.
Thank you. Yeah, so I started YouTube last May, and I've covered various 101 topics and some beyond 101 topics. Honestly, I don't know if I would have gotten the confidence to do what I did if I hadn't seen Hecate doing their stuff, because when I started out as a Hellenic Polytheist, there was literally no one. So
yeah, well, I mean, that's why I started, right? It's because there was no one. One bit of credit that I will give to Ocean and Wolf is after the channel that shall not be named and all the fallout from that, they really pushed me along with Jen and a few other people to start my own channel to kind of fill that gap because I was a little unconfident, but they were like, holy balls, you know everything about everything all the time and never stop talking our ears off. Go talk an audience's ear off instead of us. So which was said with love, by the way, but that's more or less how that conversation went down. There was also a lot of hey, you matter to the community, but that was there was a gap in the market, as it were. There was a gap in accessibility. Like, one of the things that drove me crazy was that when I first got into Hellenism, the 101 books they're not all bad. There are some that are unequivocally bad. Y'all know which one I'm talking about. But they all have problems. And so, like, there's not, like, heathens have a few 101 texts that they can just buy, or a website that you could just kind of go to where it has, this is how you start. We don't really have that from a reliable standpoint. There are a few that kind of exist. They always amazing. Hellenian has some good, like, resources with calendar stuff, but we don't really have a one-stop shop, as it were, anywhere for, start to finish. Here is a tradition that you can just kind of be confident with. Like, we don't have that. And that's kind of what I set out to do with the channel, especially because for a lot of folks, the mishmash of blogs that I had to use to kind of get started, it's hard to go through that much reading and to dig through that much stuff to figure out what's actually reliable.
Yeah, it is so hard to figure out reliability, and that's one thing that I try to emphasize over on my channel, that I'm not a scholar. And even if I was a scholar, there's this one YouTuber who has a PhD, and she always tries to present her information in a way of just being unbiased and be like, I don't know everything. Here's my gathering of sources, and trying to let people make their own decisions while also clarifying, a topic, which can be a bit of a dance.
Oh, Akita says welcome, by the way. Thank you so much, Akita.
Thank you.
So this actually sort of segues nicely into the topic that you wanted to talk about, because when you're talking about doing research can either be unending and obsessive or absolutely freaking exhausting, depending on sort of what aspect of research and how much it engages you if you are neurodivergent. Which, full disclosure, for those of you who are new or from Fel's audience and haven't seen me before, I've got ADHD. That is my major neurodivergency. I go through obsessive swings of, I can't do anything but read everything and talk everybody's ears off about this topic, to I'm sitting there scrolling on my phone on Twitter for hours and hours and hours, and I cannot get myself to do things. And so that can be a major struggle, especially when you're first starting out, because there's also a lot of that kind of internal fear of, well, have I learned enough to actually start? Like, have I learned enough? Do I understand this well enough? Did these blog posts or this scholarly article or whatever, with a religion that has as much homework as any reconstructed tradition does, that can be such a hurdle for folks that are neurodivergent starting out.
Yeah, it's when I started my YouTube channel, I actually was not yet diagnosed with ADHD. I was in the process of being diagnosed with ADHD, partly because of just the pandemic, and being unemployed made me kind of realize, there was things I always wanted to do, like start a YouTube channel, that I just could never get around to doing. And I didn't realize that until someone pointed out that, hey, maybe you have ADHD. That's very true. ADHD, aka all or nothing. That is so true. And for a while, I thought that, I had this blessing of always having this, I called it my muse for a while. This, like, always turned on, like, always creative, always ever flowing. But then I couldn't clean my room or do my homework at school. And I kind of viewed that as like a curse instead of two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, a lot of us, and potentially triggering language for folks who are neurodivergent and have dealt with this, but a lot of us kind of get accused of being lazy. And as far as late diagnosis, hi, I've been there. I didn't get diagnosed until I was 24, because, like, people who are AFAB, unfortunately, it just gets missed in us, because for one thing, it's just not very well studied. Hyperactive boys are very easy to identify. People that get identified as girls, we tend to be a bit quieter. Like, just the expression of ADHD is, at the very least, like, I want to see more study done eventually on, like, whether it is, like, hormonal or something, like if it's societal or what it is, with the differences in ADHD expression, because it very well could be some combination of both, right? Like, we're already learning societal expectations from the time we're 1 year old. Developmental psychology is fascinating. But, like, late diagnosis is pretty typical.
Yeah, I was mind blown when, my therapist said to me, "Hey, I think you might have ADHD," because I'd gone through my entire life without any sort of, acknowledgement that that could be a possibility.
Well, yeah, and like especially because a lot of us are kind of taught to mask very early on also, right? Like the thing is like the example that was given to me, and I'm going to use the term boy and girl here just to make it a little easier to use the analogy, but keep in mind I'm just talking about AFAB and AMAB here specifically. Like boys often, like a boy with ADHD more often than not just wouldn't get their homework done and would make some sort of excuse. Like if we have a report due, like if a girl has a report due, most of us will try to do a really slapdash job and like get it all done the night before, because disappointment in other people, we're kind of taught to be people pleasers, a lot of us. And so there's this idea that like we kind of mask and sort of pseudo pass where our entire lives are completely out of control, but we kind of almost manage to make it look like sometimes we maybe have half of our shit together, so people don't realize how hard we're struggling. And that's why a lot of like AFAB folks especially get diagnosed later. A lot of the time it's either when kids get, like when they have kids and get diagnosed, or like because there's some major life event that makes lives even more complicated and things just all fall apart. Like whether that's COVID in your case, or in my case, it was getting married and trying to run a household for like 3 years and figuring out that like household plus career plus, like school equals brain melt. Like I can get maybe one of those things to work, right? So like usually it's some major life transition where you're sort of expected to take on more responsibility than your brain might want to let you. That gets us diagnosed.
Yeah. I was like, I have all the time in the world, and then I just spent I literally can't even remember a single thing I did during 2020. Oh yes.
Waifu, link is in the description to my Discord server, which is primarily Hellenist. It's an allyship Discord, so we have a whole bunch of different folks. But yeah, actually, there's also an allied server called Heroes Allianos that you can access once you become a member of my server, or if you can find it, that is also primarily Hellenism based. So, but let's talk a little bit about your experience with sort of the intersections between that, because obviously there's the ever-present OMFG, how does research work and why does my brain, because like that's one of the big hurdles, and it's one that I think gets discussed more than some of the others maybe, but the research hurdle and the attitude towards some sections of the community towards folks who might struggle with that, I think that that's something that doesn't get discussed near enough. Like, I think that the research hurdle itself in OMFG, religion with homework, gets memed a lot, but I don't think people really stop to consider the genuine struggles that some of us might have with, say, if you're dyslexic, struggling to read an extremely long paper that might not be the most accessible language to begin with, right? Like, there's a sort of class divide, and, with the accessibility of a lot of that material, like, I was cracking jokes about one of the books that I just got and how I never would have been able to afford it without patrons, right? Like, but there's also an accessibility in terms of like learning and focus, because like some of us have a hard time even reading an incredibly engaging book of fiction, but like then you have these dry ass academic papers that might be insulting you as you read them, and it's like, is this self-hatred? Like, do I hate myself?
It's so true. I'm trying to find, there was a really one that just made me crack up. Let me see if I can find it. I don't know, just like the way that you read like any of these, they're just so this argument has been challenged by a book published by Bruno Curie on the cult of heroes as reflected in the poetry of Pindar, especially in the genre that we now know as victory ode or repetition. I just read that. I couldn't tell you what that meant.
Well, when I love finding scholarly turf wars, those are fun. Like when you see like the paper and then paper responding to the paper and then paper responding to the response, and it's just like, damn, some people are mad at each other.
I know, it's very funny, but they always say it in like, like Burckhardt. He's Greek Religion by Walter Burckhardt. It's a very good, very thorough book, but it's also sometimes I'm just like, it's
barely the beginning. It is barely the beginning, and there are also things that are very outdated in it.
Oh yeah, I mean I don't think he's alive anymore. I think he died a couple years ago. But yeah, no, like especially when you're looking at older sources, which can be useful because if you know how to, that's the other thing, is trying to discern from older sources, which is like another conversation of itself. But they use very like
anything by
archaic
Nielsen is
language.
always sus. Everything by Nielsen is sus. Everybody references it, and it's always sus.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always just hard to read some stuff. Like I was referencing Farnell, who's the only Victorian I can kind of tolerate, who because he likes to sass other Victorian scholars, which I think is hilarious. But like reading his stuff, you have to do with a grain of salt. Oh yeah, it's so true. But like reading Farnell, first of all, he's very wealthy, like a wealthy classicist from the Victorian period. So you're trying to read what on earth he's saying, and it's just, it's just a headache. Yeah, I'm not even sure if I figured out a good way to figure that out. I mean, I guess for me, like here's what I like always advise people to do. We tend to generally, unless you're doing scholarly research, you tend to like read a book from start to finish, but I actually don't think that's a good way to do research. You generally
It depends on the book, because some books, like some are monographs that are a single focus topic. Like the book on Hostios, for example, if you don't read it start to finish, you're going to get lost. But like some, like the collection that I just got from Christiane Servanu Inwood, they're collections of papers, and some of them, like the book Montague, are actually meant to be read start to finish because of the way the essays interconnect. But some of them, like say I'm trying to think of or like it's like Oracles and Omens, which is the one I recommended to you yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
That is a collection where you don't have to read it start to finish. Like you could just read the chapter of whatever and you'd be fine. Like it's also kind of understanding what the utility and organization of the book is, which is why I always tell people read the entire introduction so you can understand the organization of whatever it is you've just picked up, and then kind of continue from there, because you can make better decisions about what's going to be useful once you've read the introduction.
Right. It's hard to, because oftentimes people will ask me, like, do you have any book recommendations for Hestia as an example? Picked Hestia because my next video is going to be on Hestia. And it's always hard because the answer is no. There's not a single book that's just on Hestia, but you can recommend parts of a book, like Hestia cults in a chapter by Greek cults by Lewis Farnell, or other
personal devotion among the Greeks, I believe, has one.
Yeah,
it has like an entire section on Hestia.
Yeah, so it's hard too when you're looking at gods specifically. Like now there's a book series called Gods and Heroes, which
excellent, highly recommend. Those are so accessible. Those are so accessible.
They like don't have books on Hestia yet, right? Because they're, you can't expect a scholar to. That's what it takes them 100 years to write anything. You can't expect them to just churn them out. So it's hard when there's like deities. Like they haven't even done one on Hecate, probably because Hecate is extremely complicated. So their book on Hecate would probably take a while. But there's no like one book on Hestia.
Well, also which Hecate, because like Hecate unfortunately had the both fortune, I guess, and misfortune of getting adopted by a lot of medieval magicians as a sort of pseudo like representative force, and like there's also a lot of like intermixing with the Wiccan community, and so anything that covers her is going to have to cover a lot of that too, because it influences the way that modern people think about her.
Yeah, that's very true. I have a series on Hecate that's slowly unpacking her, but she is extremely complicated. Which
she's a lot. It also, which era and which city state are you talking about? That's another one of the big challenges in Hellenism, is we have so much material that like you kind of have to specialize by nature or you're going to drive yourself crazy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I see. Philip here said the problems in these books are not written for you as your intended audience. They've written for scholars who have PhDs. That is the other thing. And actually, Sarah Iles Johnston talks about this, and she wrote an essay on like Hellenic Polytheism, which was wild to me to see a classicist. Like it felt weird. I was like, oh no, they know we exist. And
they like that was wild. Like I've actually slowly become like starting to fan person after Sarah Iles Johnston, just because like her work is so freaking accessible. It's incredible. I have all of her monographs at this point. Like it's good shit. It's good shit, guys.
But it's so funny. She points this out too in her little essay, which I don't know if I can share it somewhere. I'll share it somewhere, I guess. She has an essay where
if you put it in the little private chat in StreamYard, I will post it in the live chat for everybody.
Okay, I will pull it up as I talk. So yeah, she wrote an essay on how she pointed out that Hellenic polytheists use classics, right, like writings from classicists, as not necessarily religious material, but like help in developing their religion. And she analyzed it from a very academic standpoint, which was also very weird to see. It was like I was being watched in a weird way, or I
Oh
was like,
look,
oh
we're being.
no,
Oh look, I'm the object of study now
the
instead of
one-way mirror is not so one way.
Wait, they know we exist.
Yeah.
Run,
So
hide.
yeah, she points that out. She's like, she said that Hecate Sotera had been one of the best-selling classics books of all time. And she said that she knows that it is not other classicists who are buying her book. She's like, I
I
know
have
that,
that book.
yeah, she's like, I know that everyone is buying this because they are like reading it from a to gather something for the religious perspective, which is true. So it's difficult with these books because the reason a lot of them aren't accessible is because, yeah, they're not written for Hellenic polytheists. They're written for other PhD scholars, which is like,
besides that also, like, let's face it, most academics are not really taught how to write well
right.
either. Like every so often you'll run across one who has a writing background, like freaking I always forget his name. The person who wrote Smoke Signals for the Gods, FD something. I'm trying to remember his name. But like he is extremely enjoyable to read. So is Radcliffe Edmonds III, who wrote Drawing Down the Moon, which is like the best book on magic, I think, like that there is right now for like within a Hellenic, like Greco-Roman perspective, and especially on the Greek magical papyri. Like his viewpoints on that, he goes so into detail. It's incredible. If y'all want to get into Hellenic magic, that shit's accessible and it's fun to read. Please pick that shit up. But like when you're talking about that, most of them they're trying to keep their tenure or get tenure, publish or perish, right? Like they're not writing to write the way that say you or I would. We have to have writing skills to keep our audience captivated. They need to be able to kind of communicate ideas to other people well enough to keep their tenure.
Yeah. That is the other thing. And also, like, when you're writing, like, so I have a friend who is like doing religious studies, getting a master's, and eventually ideally will get a PhD. And him, like, hearing him talk, he's a very engaging person. And when he writes non-academically, he's very engaging, but academia, it's just like it forces you to write in this way. Like I have considered,
it's stilted.
yeah, like I have considered taking because I am lucky that I live near a very prominent college that also offers extension classes, meaning they offer them to the public, but they offer it at this Ivy League taught level. And I'm like, oh God, like if I take this class, like it would be very fascinating to experience an actual classics class. But then also, I went to school for art. Like, I don't know if I have the academic writing skills to write at like an Ivy League approved academic level, because like I struggled in my undergrad history classes because the way that I wrote was just not academic enough. And I struggled.
I mean, it's a big gatekeeping thing. Like a lot of folks who speak dialects of English other than standard written English, which there are many, many different dialects like that folks experience. But I know that it's a major POC problem that, like learning how to write in a very specific way, people are treated as less intelligent if they can't learn how to do that. And for those of us who are neurodivergent, this brings us like right back around. That skill, being able to sit down and focus long enough to write something like that, is a major challenge. Now, I happen to be lucky, and I know that you have this exact same blessing/curse in that writing, I'm so obsessed with it that it might as well be a special interest of mine. So my interest-based nervous system, as I often put it gloms onto that shit and like we're ready to go. Like I'm addicted to the process of writing. But for folks who don't have writing as a passion or a special interest, it can be a major struggle because it's very tedious. It's very slow. It took me 3 days to write the script for this week. It's 14 pages long. It took me months to do all the research for it. And if you don't have that dedication, if you don't have that obsession to drive you with an interest-based nervous system like ours, you're going to have a really hard time actually completing things. And then, of course, there's all the shame that goes with that.
That is very, very true. That's another thing that's sometimes hard for me when people like ask me, how do you, read these books. Like I struggle to pay attention, and it's sometimes hard for me to know the best way to answer that, because like
I made a video so I would stop having to answer that question.
I also made my research in Hellenism and sources video, which just talk a little bit about that. But it's sometimes hard for me to like think about the best way to answer that, because for me, like, yeah, writing and research, I'm up until 1 a.m. What was my most recent tab that I opened at like 1 a.m. is Epiphany and chalking the door on January 6th. Like, just random things that'll go down a rabbit hole. Of course, then I forget everything.
My current obsession is divine madness and the tripartite Greek soul. Like, that's the thing, like madness and tragedy and like the tripartite Greek soul. That's the thing that I'm obsessed with right now. Because like these obsessions, they'll grab your brain and you can't think about anything else, even when you're supposed to be working on something else that you already promised you were going to do.
Yep. That's for me, like YouTube. I struggled so hard to start. Like, I've literally been trying to do YouTube since YouTube was invented. I was 11 or 12 when YouTube first like came out. And I tried. There is a video somewhere. I removed it from YouTube, but you might still be able to access it. There's a video of like 11-year-old me doing some wild things on the internet. But for me,
the internet is forever.
I know. The issue for me was I just could never. I was like always trying to do everything and nothing, and I didn't have any schedule because I thought that I couldn't stick to a schedule. But then turned out not having any schedule
is even harder.
Was even harder, Like, I'm not
it's like
burning
your brain.
banner.
It's like you're allergic to having a schedule, and like your brain is pulling against it at every second. But you know that if you deviate from the schedule that you have set, it's going to be even worse for you because the shame is harder, and your brain just doesn't know that right now. Like, I literally have to tell myself sometimes, the way that I'm going to feel at the end of today, if I don't get this thing done, is going to be so much worse than the difficulty, the inertia that I have to overcome to do it right now. And like that was when I had an ADHD coach, like life coach, which most of the time those are scams, but this guy actually really knew what the hell he was doing. He's retired now, so I can't recommend people to him. But I had an ADHD life coach pretty shortly after I got diagnosed, so I could kind of understand my diagnosis from the inside out, because this guy ran a really popular blog on ADHD and creativity at the time, and that's why I ended up hiring him. And that idea of the interest-based nervous system was something we kind of developed together a little bit, but so was this idea of, it's going to hurt me more in an hour if I don't get started now than it hurts right now to stop doing what I'm doing. Like, literally having to consciously walk myself through that as I was starting to adjust my medication was a revolution. It was a game changer.
Yeah. That was also like my friend who is getting his master's. He also
we'll get into this in a second, sarcastic tendencies, because that's a whole ass mood right there.
But he's been, he's AMAB. He's been diagnosed with ADHD since he was a little kid. He was also one of the ones who kind of encouraged me to seek out a diagnosis, because he and I are like the same person, but like it's kind of funny. But anyway, he told me that he has learned how to quote unquote hack his ADHD. He has the
that's the language I use too, is like figuring out ways to get interested in something so now I can go and do it.
Basically, he was like, if I know that if I do something for a certain period of time, like a long enough period of time, like once you force yourself to do something, it will eventually like spiral into an obsession. And I was like, oh, that is so true. Like, I work as a seamstress professionally, and it's nice because I don't always have to interact with people, and I can just watch videos while I sew. I mean, it's not always so fun in games, but my coworker put on like Downton Abbey the other day, and I haven't thought about Downton Abbey in years and years and years. And because she had it on throughout the entire day, I got home and I was like, I gotta watch it, just because just being in that proximity long enough sort of like jump started my brain to be like, let's just read about the 19 teens. Like, I gotta do it.
Well, and I think that this also sort of brings us to when you're talking about getting started and inertia. Like, inertia is that force, right? It's that thing that says stay on your butt, keep scrolling on Twitter, keep staring off into space, thinking about whatever it is you should be doing instead of doing it. Because you don't even have to have something in front of your face to just stare off into space and get lost in your head. That's how easy it is. Like, I know that folks on the spectrum have talked about this too, just sort of being able to completely lose yourself in yourself, and then suddenly it's an hour later, and where the hell did the time go? And like that can be a major struggle, not only just with confidence, which, you know, let's face it, most of us who have neurodivergencies don't, that's not something that inspires confidence. Like that's something you're punished for from a very early age. And apologies again if folks find this triggering when we're talking about these things. I am going to talk a little bit about my childhood. Like I was called lazy. I was verbally abused pretty brutally by teachers and like some of my teachers and like parents. One of the funny stories I tell is that in high school I had an AP chemistry teacher who I used to do homework in class because she would write it up in the right hand corner of the board every day, like before we'd even come in. And she actually stopped doing that because she got annoyed with me doing homework in class, even though I never failed any tests. Like she literally called me out in class and said that that was why she wasn't doing that anymore, because you have to pay attention. It's like, why do I need to pay attention? I read the exact same thing you're talking about in the book last night. Like I can get the homework done now because my house was not the most stable, right? So it was anybody with neurodivergency, try doing homework when people are yelling at each other. That ain't the greatest thing. So like doing it at school was how I kept my grades up, and she literally just stopped doing that to punish me for doing homework in class. And so when you're talking about that, like most of us don't have the best confidence, right? Like a lot of us are very beaten down. We doubt ourselves. We're taught to doubt ourselves from a young age. Diagnosis can be a revelation, but some of us don't even have access to that. So a lot of us kind of suspect that we're neurodivergent, but don't have that clinical confirmation. And that can make it a lot harder to practice because like you have the inertia to overcome, but there's also that confidence issue of being afraid to start. So let's talk a little bit about that, because I don't think that fear of starting is nearly as well discussed as it should be. Like I've talked a lot about what to do to like continue a practice if you've fallen off or something. Like I've done an entire live stream on that. I did a video about like pagan imposter syndrome, but that fear of starting in the first place, I think that it's often sort of dismissed as, oh, well, the gods called you for a reason or something like that, which, you know, that's very loving, that's very kind, that's very positive language. But I think that the roots of that aren't discussed near enough. Right? Like it's not just latent Christianity. A lot of it is this sort of learned shame. So like, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because it's something that I think about a lot.
Yeah. This is another thing that's really interesting for me, because I feel like now that I've been in, I don't know, been in the Hellenic Polytheist like for a while, or at least a couple of years now, more than a couple of years, I guess. It's hard for me now to remember what it was like being a beginner, but recently I've been looking into like other like paths. Like I've been looking into like Gaulish polytheism, because that's something that has always fascinated me and has only recently seen a surge in scholarship. And now I'm like, how do I begin? Even though I've begun so many times as throughout my various paths. I guess most people probably don't know this about me, but I have been around a lot of different religious paths. I've been a modern witch. I've been a pseudo Wiccan. I've been a New Ager. I've been it all. Starting is such a strange thing, which is why I get really annoyed when people like try to scare beginners by being like, deities are dangerous, imposter spirits. And I'm just like, but okay, it's already hard enough to start when you're wanting to start in something but are a beginner. No need to scare people. I mean, I honestly think that
Well, I mean, they also scare people a lot with there's one right, true way to do things.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say which segment of the Hellenist community does this the most. I mean, it tends to start with a P, but like that's the most that I'm going to say. There's a particular segment of the community that says if you don't do things a very specific way, then the gods are going to be mad at you, that'll inflict agos somehow, which again is wild to me as somebody who is a revivalist rather than a strict recon. Like that's I don't understand how you expect to never do a single eclectic thing the entirety of your religious life. Like, I don't get how, at that point, what agency do the gods have? Like, what's the point of worshiping if you can't respond to this incredible, like, relationship you're building?
Right. Yeah, that's something too that's so, like, I came to, like, Hellenic Polytheism, what some people would call the quote unquote wrong way. I started out as a modern witch, and I started out like,
I think that's how a lot of people
yeah,
come
I mean, a
to
lot of
Hellenic
people, yeah, most
polytheism.
people that I know in the community started out as a modern witch. I have met people, but very few have I met who have started out as just Hellenic polytheists. And
Melinda, both Fel and I have amazing 101 lists. Mine is called Common Hellenism. Fel's is called Hellenism 101. Check both of them out. It will give you a very firm foundation for starting. My videos, How to Pray in Hellenism, Miasma, How to Purify Before a Ritual, and How to Give Offerings to the Gods. Those three together, you watch those three, you understand it, take notes, whatever, you can get started worshiping just off of those three. Like, everything else is just icing on the cake after you kind of understand those basic concepts.
I'm trying to track my neurodivergent thought. Where did it go? Oh yes. So
There's a lot
yeah,
of judgment, I think, for folks who practice magic in the Hellenic community and people who came from other things. It's like, oh, well, you're coming, you must not understand anything because it's a completely different worldview. And it's like, yeah, it is, but that develops as you experience the difference in the way you're engaging with deity, right? Like, that's something you learn, that different worldview as you engage with deity. It's not something that, like, you have to adopt first, at least
right,
not in my experience.
right. Yeah, so for me, like, I started out as like a modern witch. I called myself specifically a sea witch, and I worked with, I don't really use the term work with. If you want to know why, I have a video talking about it.
Yeah,
um,
I respect people who do, but I also don't tend to use the term work with.
yeah,
I use the term worship because that's specifically how I engage with the gods, but I know that some people see their relationship with the gods differently, and that's valid.
yeah. So I specifically worked with Aphrodite at that time, and I had like little altars, but they weren't like to Aphrodite, they were more spell altars. Um, and then I started like working with Apollo from this witchy perspective, and then I came into like a Hellenic polytheist Discord somehow. I think I found it on Tumblr of all places. And when I got in there, it was like a light bulb went off, and
Mm-hmm.
I just like did like a complete turn and kind of went into that direction. But I don't know. I try to encourage people to go where they feel called. And I know that sounds kind of like a cop out answer, but like, for example, I don't care about philosophy that much. As much as I would love to care about philosophy, and I respect people who care about philosophy, it's just something that does not interest me. So I'm not going to like research heavily into classical philosophy because that doesn't interest me. Or as much as I am amazed at people who can reconstruct calendars, that's not my strong suit. So I'm not going to necessarily dive into calendars, but I love festivals as an example. So I'll read anything I can get on a festival, whether it's and like this is where I think hyperfixations can come to an advantage, because Hellenic
We have.
polytheism. Oh,
I'll let you finish your thought, but we have a really good question in the chat, and I think that that'll be an interesting thing to address. So I'm gonna let you finish your thought, but I just wanted to let you know.
okay. Yeah, that's where I think like hyperfixations can come in handy, because Hellenic polytheism is actually pretty broad. So finding, do you like the certain god, do you like festivals, and finding that thing that you really enjoy. And
Your gateway drug, as it were,
yeah,
because yeah,
yeah,
like, I have noticed that a lot of Hellenic polytheists will start off with one or two deities and then just kind of fall into everything else because it's very
mhm,
hard to interact with one or two deities and not have all the others come knocking on your door.
it's true.
Like, I thought it was just going to be Athena and Hermes. I'm like, I made my little shrines, all's good. Athena demanded that I make a shrine and start offering to her, whatever. Okay, that's chill. And then wait, why am I now having dreams about all these other, what is going on here? Like, because the gods are so interrelated, right? Like, they intersect with each other and with each other's domains in ways that the deeper you get into research, the more appreciation you have for just the broadness of like God of XYZ doesn't come anywhere close to describing the incredible vastness of these beings. And as you build these relationships with them, that becomes more and more clear. And you see that way that echoes out into your life. It's hard not to start picking up more and more practice and appreciating more and more deities. So the question that I wanted to pull up was actually pluralism. That is the question here. The Serpent of Aries says, I have fallen headfirst into Hellenism, but my mother's a North pagan. Should we recognize other deities? I feel like we should. I mean, that is entirely a personal decision. It depends on how you view polytheism. I am a hard polytheist, which means I think that all the gods are real, but I personally only engage with the ones I engage with. So you can recognize other deities, and I've worshipped alongside heathens, and I've made offerings to heathen gods in that context. In my personal practice, I worship specifically the Hellenic deities, and I also practice my Haida practice completely separate. I don't talk about that. Don't ask me about it. Not getting into it. But like those two things to me are separate. Some people do syncretism, and some people, like, I can acknowledge that other gods are real without having to engage in praxis with them, which I think is something that a lot of folks, when they come out of a like monotheist tradition, have a harder time understanding. Like, oh, those gods are real, but they don't demand your worship right now. Like, I think that's part of the whole falling into it thing that we were talking about as well, is you might recognize that, say, the Kemetic deities are real, but you're being called by the Hellenic and the Norse ones, and it's okay to worship them and to acknowledge that the Kemetic deities are real and not do anything about it, right? Like, you can have praxis with the deities that you choose to have praxis with. And it's actually historical for that to be the case. A lot of people would honor their own gods in foreign lands, or they would pay short homage to gods of foreign lands while they were there, and then go back to only worshiping their own gods when they are back at home. So, like, there's like multiplicity to it. There's a pluralism in polytheism where we can mutually recognize each other's traditions and even variances within traditions. Again, Fel and I practice slightly differently, right? Like, you watch my video on prayer and you watch like the videos on prayer and offering and such on Fel's channel, you're going to see differences. Like, you're going to see differences in approach and differences in like materials and even like the era that we reconstruct from. Like, there's going to be a variance. There was in ancient times, all city-states in Hellenism alone, like, had different emphasis in their pantheons. Some of them had completely different mythological systems. Like, there were some similarities, like the epics appeared to be fairly universal, but most of our stuff comes from Athens. So that's where we get the majority of our info, but what we do have surviving from other places shows that there was a remarkable diversity and an acceptance of that diversity. That is one of the major strengths of pagan practice. So, Fel, I'll let you answer as well, but that's my take on that question.
Yeah. I am also a hard polytheist, but I'm also softer than some people. I notice some people are kind of extreme soft or extreme hard with no room in the middle, but that's a conversation for another day. So for me, I see the gods as separate, but like I have called upon syncretism before. Like, I have a video talking about personal syncretism where I talked about how for Sancta Lucia, which is Saint Lucy, I kind of syncretized her with Artemis because of just some UPG, and I go a lot more in depth about it in that video. So I do some like weird syncretism just from my own very eclectic past that I like don't really feel the need to completely distance myself from. And like, yeah, I'm very lucky to live in a household that is very pagan up until a couple months ago. I think the majority of us were pagan in this house. So I have prayed in rituals and done rituals to gods that like I don't have any relationship with, but by like participating in the ritual, it kind of, I don't know, it's hard to describe unless you've like been in like a ritual to like your friend's god. There is definitely a power there and a connection there, and I can feel that connection, but
it feels
still
different,
like,
though.
yeah,
like,
it definitely feels
you know
different.
you're a guest in the house, as it were.
Yeah, it's like you go over to your friend's house and you bring like a nice bottle of wine or something. Like, you're here, like I'm acting the part
Well, it's more
of
like a
being your
friend's
house.
party. It's actually more
Yeah.
like a friend's party. Like, if you're there at the house, like, you might be the guest of honor, you might be the focus, right? But if like you're there at a party and you don't know any of the other guests, like, you're there, you bring your nice bottle of wine, but you know that you're a guest. Like, this is not your party.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's very much what it's like.
So as far as like that goes, syncretism, the thing with syncretism is there are a bunch of different views on how that works. And I'm actually working on a video on syncretism, and it's going to take a long frickin' time because Hellenism got syncretized a lot, like not even just talking about Roman syncretism, which is a bugbear and an obsession, but also like there's syncretism with the Near East and things like Greco-Buddhism. Like there's syncretism that you can see, like there are statues to the Greek gods in India. You know, there's the syncretism in Egypt. There's also syncretism that's recorded among the Gauls. Like Hellenism is every frickin' where. Like it's just the syncretism is wide, and there appears to be kind of three major viewpoints that I've identified for how syncretism works. There's the belief that the two separate gods just stay completely separate in every way, shape, or form, but syncretism allows two different cultures to understand aspects of each other's like gods in a way that they might not have discovered on their own through their own cultural lens. So there's that. There's the view that syncretism is simply cultures trying to understand each other's culture through their deities, and thereby assuming things that may not necessarily be there based off of surface level comparisons. And then there's the view that syncretism is sort of the gods exist separately but also together at the same time. So like Ra Harakati, for example, is Ra and Horus, but also Ra and Horus together because the gods are fluid. They don't exist. Like disembodied minds don't have the problem of selfhood that like things with bodies do. Like the way their minds work is radically different than us. We can't even begin to comprehend like the full scope of how they perceive the world, right? Like timelessness alone changes that viewpoint. So like the boundaries between the gods might be a lot more fluid than they are for us. So there's a chance that that syncretism is a recognition of the way in which those gods directly intersect and us attempting to puzzle that out. So that's one of the other viewpoints that I've seen.
It also gets confusing when you get inner pantheon syncretism like Artemis Hecate Selene or Artemis Iphigenia. Because then you're like, oh, they're I mean, that's like, there used to be a stronger distinction scholarly between chthonic and uranic than
Pluton. Pluton is like the stunning example of that. Like, is Pluton Hades? Is Pluton his own god? Were they syncretized? Like, what is going on there? It depends on which scholar is yelling at you.
Iacchos and Bacchus and Dionysus. Who knows?
Yeah. Who freaking knows? And again, it depends on which scholar is yelling at you and whether or not they're up for tenure.
Yeah.
Well, and that's another view, I think, like coming back to sort of neurodivergency. There's an interesting discussion going on in the chat about like executive dysfunction and procrastination, which honestly, executive dysfunction causes procrastination, but procrastination, there's a connotative idea that procrastination is purposeful, and I think that procrastination cannot be purposeful, and thereby executive dysfunction can cause it, as opposed to trying to distinguish the two. Procrastination caused by executive dysfunction is accidental procrastination, but it still is. It's just that procrastination caused by executive dysfunction shouldn't carry the shame with it that it does. And I think learning to treat yourself with respect and kindness in relation to piety, and learning how to, for lack of a better way to put it, chain your habits together so that you're more likely to say, for example, Hesiod in Works and Days talks about how you should pour a libation when you first get up and then again before bed. He talks about it as dawn and dusk because he's very agrarian, but like, you know, we can interpret that as, you know, pious people pour a libation in the morning as the first act of their day and like in the evening as the last act of their day. And I don't know about you, but like I had an existential crisis when I tried to do a My Daily Practices video because it's not always daily. Right? Like I'm very pious. I'm very devoted to my gods, but a lot of my worship comes in the form of devotional activities because for a long time, I really struggled getting to the altar to do formal ritual because it cost so many spoons. And so what I found out was that I could almost always manage the morning thing if I do it first thing in the morning as the first act of my day when I have the freshest, most newly minted spoons that I'm going to have for that day. If anything distracts me, the longer my day goes on, the more stuff I've done, the less and less executive like attention I have to do that. And so I had to start prioritizing it in a different way, understanding how the ebbs and flows of my energy works. And I think that we're often discouraged from doing that as individuals, like discouraged from recognizing how we work on an individual level and recognizing that and setting realistic expectations for ourselves. Like one of the best bits of advice I ever got from my life coach was plan your goals for what you can do on a bad day so that you can surprise yourself on a good one instead of expecting yourself to do the same level of production you do on your best days. And like setting that baseline and making sure that when you track your energy, even on a bad day, first thing in the morning, I can pour a libation, you know, like that sort of thing, right? Like learning how to be patient with yourself and understanding yourself. Like I'd love to hear your experiences with that because it's one of the hardest thing for those of us who like grew up, especially who got diagnosed later, where we didn't know why we had a harder time with things than other people did.
Yeah, so for me, people do ask me about my daily practice. And I always kind of laugh when I read those, not for any sort of like meanness, but just because it reminds me of my own my own feelings on that. So like for me, I work kind of weird hours. I have very weird hobbies that aren't necessarily consistent. Um, so something that I do every day, regardless, is I make tea. I'm an avid tea drinker. I drink tea all the time, and that's just something that I do just subconsciously, and something that I
Tea
started
is
doing.
life.
Yes, it's true. Tea is life. I'm drinking tea right now. And something that I'll do every single cup of tea that I make, I pray over it. Sometimes I dedicate it to a specific god. Like if I'm a seamstress, so I do a lot of prayers to Athena because even though she's weaving, they didn't really have.
Yeah, you're gonna.
Yeah, yeah, they didn't have sewing the way we have then. So that's where revivalism comes in. I see her.
I mean, I pray to her when I knit and when I crochet as well. Like different kind of thing than weaving, but still, like it. Irgani, like she is of the fabric, of the cloth, of the work. Like clearly, she's got a hand in those techniques too.
Right. So yeah, that's something that I do. Every day I'll pray over my tea, or when I go into work, when I take down a new dress to work on, I'll quietly, under my breath or even in my head, just like pray very simply, Athena, this is for you. Athena, guide my hands so this alteration goes well. Just something as simple as that. I am really like, I am not out here pouring wine out on the daily or even on the weekly. I try to do stuff on the new moon and like do the cleaning, like what would be kind of expected for on Numenias, this day of offerings. Don't always get around to it, but trying, yeah, it's really.
Well, that's where devotional activities can be such a big deal.
Yeah.
Like dedicating that time and like really immersing yourself. Because to me, I do purification with Kirnapes before doing like devotional activities. So like purification and then really centering your focus on the deity and their role in that activity is what distinguishes a devotional activity from just like recognizing the gods in that thing. But when you really focus on it, that can become a way to almost deepen your practice, because even if you've offered that day, then extending something like cooking a meal and making it this incredible mindful activity where you recognize, say, Hestia's role as the fire that is heating your food, via the electricity of your hearth, recognizing Hephaestus's role in like the fact that the oven that you're using even exists, sort of immersing yourself in that and in that dedication to the god and basking yourself in your love and appreciation for that god as you're acting these out, like to where that action itself is dedicated to them. That can be a powerful way to keep integrating religious practice, even when your brain is telling you you can't get up and go to your altar right now. You are still then doing something to recognize that relationship between you and the gods. And I found that has deepened my practice so freaking much. Like I still do formal ritual and I still try to do it as close to daily as possible. But on my really bad days, like when my back goes out, when everything's on fire, like, my house is upside down and on fire and everybody's arguing and all like the bullshit's going on, like just taking that moment and doing that devotional activity, it's like the world stops. And it can be so beautiful. And it's one of the reasons I stress devotional activity so hard on my channel, because it can be a game changer for those of us who might have a harder time with formal rituals or longer prayers.
That's definitely very true. Like something that I try to say and try to emphasize is making it more like instead of trying to organize your life around ritual, organizing organizing devotionalism around your life, like especially when you're just starting out or when you've like having a really bad day or a really bad month or just really busy. So instead of trying to like look at your schedule and go, oh, I was gonna like do this thing today, instead of bending your like life around this schedule, trying to go with what your day already looks like praying over a cup of coffee. I saw someone say they pray before they like work out. So
Or
when
even
you're
like if you're in the broom closet, like pouring a libation of the tea you just made,
right,
down your sink, like just quick prayer in your head, pour a little bit down the sink, or like onto a plate or something like that. It doesn't have to be super public, right? Like it doesn't have to be super showy, but even just that little tiny dedication that's no longer yours. You're not drinking that. That's for the gods. That little act, the gods recognize how busy we are, right? The most valuable thing a modern person can give a god is their time. Stopping to integrate them into your life is itself a form of worship. And that's one of the biggest revivalist things that I hammer on over and over. The most valuable thing you can give the gods is not a piece of bread, it's not incense, it's your time, it's your devotion. Because time is the thing that we have the least of.
that is very true. And like you also have to remember that like there were like ancient Greece, it's not good, but it had a lot of slaves. There were a lot of slaves from various wars in ancient Greece, and there are like inscriptions and devotional activity, not inscriptions, but like offerings that were made by slaves. There were like specifically gods of slaves. And
Epithets
there,
specifically used by them
yes.
too. And also there was Chronia, which like,
Oh,
topsy-turvy everything.
and so it's like they obviously they didn't, busyness is not like a new thing. Like these slaves knew that the gods were there for them as well, and that they were probably up before, like up at very high, like very early in the morning, and went to bed very late at night, and probably weren't doing things that they would really want to do. And it's hard to guess at like what their lives were necessarily like, because we don't have necessarily a lot of written records necessarily from slaves themselves. We do have from some former ones, but they would probably have found time or found like praying as they're quickly doing something. Um,
Well, and I mean, like,
yeah,
you can't, like, farmers and things, you can't expect
right,
them to have spent an assload of time on a devotional ritual, right? Like, a quick libation in the morning at the household altar, or on Numania around the boundaries, and then they're off to the fields, right? Like, the average person was not an aristocrat, like, somebody like Plato who was going to write pages
right.
and pages and pages of dissertation about what the gods are and aren't. Most people lived busy lives. Like, we forget that, like, agrarian societies, there was a lot of shit to do. There was preserving the harvest, there was taking care of the fields. There's like read Works and Days and see how exhausted you get by the time when you get halfway through it, because the parts that aren't about religion are about all of the work that you have to put into growing shit, right? And like our lives are a different sort of focus. We're out of our homes a lot more. That was sort of on the homestead. So Hestia played this massive role. But for those of us, like Hermes plays a bigger role in our lives than he ever did in ancient times, because most of us have to travel upwards of half an hour just to get to where we work, right? Like the vast majority of us, like commutes are a major part of our lives. Honoring Hermes with a recognition prayer or hymn, like hymns were considered offerings. They were the primary offerings of bards. Reciting a quick hymn while you're stuck in fucking traffic could be a great way to pass the time, and it's also a great way to honor Hermes in that moment where you're in his domain, right? Going on a walk that you're going to go on for exercise, bring an extra bottle along of something that you want to pour out a libation before you take a sip of water. There are lots of things that you can do to integrate recognition of the gods into your daily life, because the ancients didn't have to fight to do that. Their entire culture constantly reminded them that the gods were ever present in their lives. They were taught from birth all of the different names of all these different beings that were perpetually involved in every single action they took. We're surrounded by, well, people telling us that there's only one God that's involved in all of that. And so we have to like consciously create that time ourselves. And like the gods know this. The gods know we're in a different situation. Like if they didn't, then they wouldn't call us in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very, very true. And it's yeah. It's like the gods, they, and I don't necessarily think, it's hard to say like what does a god know, because I'm sure like they I don't know, I'm having trouble forming into words like I mean, I always do whenever I talk about the divine, but it's like they understand in ways that like we can't even begin to like comprehend, right? Because there are these beings that, you know, like they're so vast and grand. They're probably not sitting here like, well, Fel hasn't made an offering, you know, like what? They're not measuring time by 24 hours. They're not measuring time by 30 days in a month or even by moon cycles. It's so much more
Codice is built
vast.
over a lifetime. Like,
Mhm.
I don't know if you remember if you remember my definition of Codice that I gave in my video on like specifically. It's one of my favorite things I love to repeat because it's one of the most beautiful things I've ever written. And it's literally just a linguistic analysis of the word. But like Codice is it is the delight of the gift given, but also like on the part of the giver, but also on the part of the receiver. It is a favor returned, the delight of that return, and the joy from which it stemmed. It is devotion over time. It's reciprocity. It is the gift that is returned for the gift that was given. It is freely giving, knowing that there may be a possibility of no return, but also knowing that most likely there will be. It is the entirety of your relationship with the gods forged over lifetimes, and the
Mhm.
relationship of your community with the gods forged over the lifetime of the community. It's all the weight of spectacle and festival and tradition, and also the individual moments, the full collection of them, all added together into a single package. And it is not every individual day, it's every single time you ever did make that time to pour out, you know, the wine. It's every oath you ever made to do so and every one you fulfilled. It's every argument and prayer you've ever made. It's every time you've recognized the gods. Codice is the whole of your relationship with deity. And it's not a single day. It is the whole of your relationship with deity. If you're just starting out, your Codice is however many days that you've been starting out for. If you've been doing it for 10 years, you have 10 years of Codice and probably many more years to go. Most of us haven't even lived a quarter of the amount of time that we're going to.
Right.
So it's hard to put that into perspective that today you didn't pour a libation. How many more tomorrows do you have?
Right. Yeah, that and like there's something to like when you look at basic prayer structure, one of the ways that you see prayer structured in Hellenism and in other cultures as well is saying like if I have ever done X for you, if I've ever done that, like remember this time that I did this, which is why like for me, I tend to do a lot of little devotional acts just because it's easier for me. And then I will sometimes like make prayer beads for a deity, or I'll do that as part of a votive. So meaning like I will say, if you help me get this job, um, I will burn for you X amount of incense and buy you an old book. This was
Yeah,
a
apote prayers. Yeah,
yes, yes, yeah,
if ever I have, then I will.
yeah. So that's another way that I will do like bigger offerings is when I pray like for something like if I get this job or yes, it's true. Water is historically attested.
It is the only
Um,
libation that Demeter accepts, water and milk, because
yeah,
you cannot pour wine out to Demeter, or at least you shouldn't. It is attested in the mythology that she doesn't like alcohol.
yeah, and water is also tested for heroes. They'd be like pouring
Hmm.
water for their baths, essentially. Um, but yeah, so just
It's
all
also one of the offerings given to the dead as well, in
yes,
addition to wine and honey and like I think pomegranate seeds as well, like scooping out the pomegranate seeds over the gate over graves.
water is always a good offering.
It is, and it's also getting more and more scarce. Like we might think, oh, your faucet turns on, but like the actual potable water on Earth, that's a whole nother stream. But like it's disappearing, guys. Like it is one of the most valuable things. Water is life.
It's true. It's very, very true.
So water is also really powerful though. Like let's talk a little bit about carnips and about purification because like people who say that you can't just shower or take a bath and purify, I don't know what world you live in, but like running water of any kind was considered purifying and like the ancients didn't have access to like the kind of purification systems that we have. Like their sewers were septic for lack of a better way to put it, and if people like did their business in rivers and stuff, everybody would get sick. So like the idea of like running springs and things, I have a hard time believing that the ancients wouldn't see showers as purifying like in the modern day. Like, I have a hard time believing that if
Yeah.
these religions survived with the kind of societal influence that they had in ancient times all the way to modernity, that would not have been a thing that changed.
100%. Literally, um
That's a whole other stream. It is. It really is. But tis. I punned and Akita caught me.
Yeah, like for me, I used to do the whole shebang that some reconstructionists try to talk about with Karen Epps, which is not really attested. But literally what I do is I wash my hands every day, which people should be
I mean,
washing
there's
their
not
hands
much
every day.
attested at all about Carnips.
No,
Like,
there's
we
not.
know that they were mass made by the temples, and we know that you could like put a coin into a thing and like wash your hands with it in front of the temples. And we know that seawater was considered purifying, which is why the salt method exists. And we know that fire was considered purifying, which is why the fire method exists. We don't know that extinguishing a match was considered purifying per se. There's a lot that we don't know, but again, it seems to work for people. So it's one of those revivalist practices that I say you can do either one. Either, calling Poseidon with, creating artificial seawater because all, like most salt comes from the sea anyway, or, extinguishing the match and calling on Hestia and Apollon because,
Right.
Apollon, his role is purifier.
Right. Yeah, for me, I literally just wash my hands. Because like if you look at older sources too, sometimes it's literally them just like they're in like a battlefield and they just pour water on their hands and they're like, it's clean, water's clean, and it's running too, because it's like, I don't know, pseudo stream almost. So yeah, literally I'll just wash my hands every day, because I mean, people should be washing your hands every day, especially right now. So yeah, I'll literally just wash my hands and I'll just like say a quick mental prayer of like, may you cleanse me, like may I be cleansed, pray Hestia Apollo, and like, yeah, just
I
like
will
purify
say,
me.
by the might of Hestia and Apollon, may this water be cleansed, that all that it touches may be fit to come before the gods. That's my prayer. And it's fairly short and sweet. You can do a very similar version to Poseidon, as well, like with the salt. But either way, like, it doesn't have to be in a water font on your altar. It can be running water from your faucet. It can be a shower while you're thinking about the gods and praying to them. Like, it can be.
Right.
It doesn't. Religion shouldn't have to take over your life to be valid.
Right. Yeah, like you don't I feel like and sometimes there's almost this pressure for everyone to be their own wandering mystic, which is not everyone was Pythagoras. Not everyone's going to be wandering around yelling about beans. And I mean, I am not like that though. But yeah, like there is someone I live with is very into saints, and like folk magic, and they were reading a book that it said something like the modern mystic, you're more likely to find riding on their bicycle to work than you are in a cave. And I really liked that because it's true. Like very few of us are going to be like Marjorie Kemp, who was a famous mystic, who literally her job was being a mystic and wandering around and having visions.
Miasma is not really. I've seen things about inner purity, but ritual attitudes I've not seen referenced as miasma. In the seminal work done on it, which by the way is back in print again, apparently Amazon actually has it on sale again, Parker's Miasma. It is prohibitively expensive for most people, but it is well worth the read. It's one of the most thorough treatises on the topic I've ever read. It is like spiritual dirt, more or less. Like, I cracked the joke in this week's video, which patrons and channel members are gonna get access to that either tonight or tomorrow morning, because I finished editing it right before the stream, and I just need to do the soundtrack and I need to do the thumbnail, and that'll be up. But I made the joke that miasma is caused by the vast majority of bodily functions that cause excretions you don't want lingering on your skin by the time the function is done. This includes things like intercourse, but it also includes like defecation and urination. It includes birth and death, all of the things that mark us as being bodily beings that are not immortal.
Mm-hmm.
And so miasma, I have seen people who talk about distraction being miasma. I've read the monograph on inner purity in Greek religion, and I'm not entirely sure how I feel about it. It's the part 1, and they still haven't put out the second part yet. But I don't think that quote unquote incorrect ritual attitudes applies to modern Hellenism, if nothing else, but because the Epicureans and the Stoics and the Platonists all existed, and the gods didn't destroy any of them. Like, there weren't any lightning strikes that blew up houses from any of those groups, and they had very, very different worldviews. So if a specific attitude toward worship were required, I don't feel like the massive amount of diversity of opinion could have existed in Greece the way it did.
Right. A lot of the inner purity stuff, I think, is much more related to people who were not everyday. People who could afford to be, like I said, like wandering mystics. Like Pythagoras was very obsessed with purity to the point where he wouldn't look at a gravestone. He wouldn't be near a woman who had recently given birth.
Sometimes I wonder if the superstitious man archetype was directly mocking Pythagoras.
I have like thought that too. It's very true. Yeah, so like there's the superstitious man is a book, or not book.
It's a little section of Theophrastus's characters. Yeah.
Yeah, so even at that time period, they were making fun of people who were like really into like ritual purity to like an absolutely like wild and unnecessary degree. So it's like these things are guidelines, like it's not extremely cut and dry. Like no one's going to throw you out of a temple because I don't know, because the Theophrastus's characters, and especially the superstitious man, really put into perspective what was likely to be like the acceptable amount of caring about ritual purity, and the answer is not as much as you would think. Like a lot of it comes down to just early hygiene, like early thoughts on disease and hygiene, if you really look at it.
Well, I mean, the thing is with miasma, I mean, Parker kind of debunks that a little bit. There was definitely a strong societal, like, purity component to it, like, as well. There's a lot of things that it doesn't make sense for miasma to have been related to hygiene for. But at the same time, again, it's also, as I just said, a societal thing. And we live in a different society. Our hygiene standards and our standards of even just worldview are different. And the gods wouldn't call us if they had a massive problem with that. Purification is a sign of respect to me, which is why I do that before I approach the gods. But like, that doesn't mean that if you are sweating your ass off, in the trenches, you can't call out to Ares just because you've got a bit of blood on you, right? Like,
right. That would make all of the Iliad and Odyssey not make any sense.
It's not what they had against people giving birth. It's that miasma was that which separates us from the gods. The gods do not give birth. The gods do not die. The gods don't bleed. So blood is miasmic. The gods don't defecate. They don't urinate. The gods are immortal and deathless. Humans, all of the things that mark human mortality are miasmic. Particularly the fluids associated with those things.
Also, in terms of Pythagoras and beans, I see some people talking about that. No one's really 100% sure why he hated beans, but the Pythagoreans and the Orphics too, I believe.
Well, the Orphics weren't one group. Like some Orphics, I guess, would be more accurate.
The ones who probably took their cue from the Pythagoreans, but the Pythagoreans specifically just didn't like beans. Some of them are like, some people think it's a symbolic ban because dried beans were used to vote. Some people think it's a commentary on politics. Some people think it's because they had spirits in them. That's my other favorite one, is that beans have spirits of the dead in them. Just
well, there's one that just says that beans can prevent prophecy because of the gastrointestinal upset that they cause, which is why there is there's actually a server lore in my server. And there's a thing. This came from a joke that was 6 layers deep in recon humor, but I think you'll get it. So we talked about how you couldn't eat beans if you because they gave you gastrointestinal upset, but most people are also lactose intolerant, so you can't eat milk either. And so we ended up determining that you have to basically eat a paleo diet of nothing but meat and leafy greens if you want to be a diviner, according to Pythagoras, because if you have any gas at all, then that won't ever let you do that. So there is actually, in my server lore, there's an entry that says paleo, the required diet for oracles if Pythagoras is to be believed. Stick to it or your oracle will be a has-been. And there's a react that is a bean crying called the has-been.
That's very, very good. There's a very funny medieval drawing of Pythagoras going like this to and it says like legumes or something in Latin, like beans in Latin. It's very, very funny.
But at the same time, though, like the Pythagoreans were also rumored to be vegetarians. So what did they eat? Like they love beans and they hate beans. Like we determined like in the server, the mods and I did that like Pythagoras must have been agnostic. He did not know how he felt about beans.
Yeah, and some of that also could have been like propaganda-esque. Yeah, no one knows for sure, but some of the theories are very, very fun and very wild. So yeah, that all of that to say, like, I don't know, don't let people get you bent out of shape about ritual purity, because I think it's about respect. It's also to like, you know, when I'm brushing my teeth, like I tie it into my regular hygiene.
I'm sorry, this is cracking me up. I was actually about to ask, how close a proximity did the Pythagoreans live to each other? Because that could explain the prohibition on certain foods. Well, the thing is, I would say that would apply to the prohibition on meat more than beans, because beans make you gassy, but the farts don't stink near as bad as when you've eaten a steak. Just saying.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what Pythagoras was eating. Pythagoras also said that he went into a cave and like lived there for 200 years, and then was also flashing his thigh to people because he said he was Apollo reborn and he had a golden thigh. I don't know. He was a wild, wild man.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when I learned that he was that Pythagoras, like Pythagorean theorem, my mind was blown. I was like, no way. You're telling me
How can
that
you be so brilliant and yet so you?
Oh man, I wish my math teacher, instead of telling me about the triangles, told me about beans instead.
Ah, the beans. Bean counters. Ha! Anyway, sorry, that was terrible. So we're getting into kind of the last 15 minutes or so. Is there anything that we haven't really touched on that you wanted to talk about a little bit when you were first proposing this topic? Because you and I can talk 4 hours about everything, and our first phone call lasted for a good 4 hours completely by accident.
Classic.
ADHD says we.
So true.
Like a quarter of that was talking about like knitting and fabric design and like texture and clothing. It was so much fun.
Yeah. I mean, I guess to me, like my final more condensed thoughts are like find what interests you, because what gets you excited is going to be your strength and is going to be your gateway into Hellenism. You know, like don't read about like philosophy if it makes your head explode. I mean there are some other things that they said about beans that I'm not going to repeat here right now.
No. However, like Fel is in the Discord server. Quick plug for the Discord server. Link is in the description. Open up in a new tab. Folks that first join become Xenon, but Fel is actually in the Discord server. So like we'll be here chatting in the video discussion channel for people like to discuss people's answers and stuff. Like we're both there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And like feel free to just like, I don't know, ask me.
No, those are completely unrelated.
Yeah. Yeah, so find what excites you and follow that, and like also know that things are going to ebb and flow. Like even though I post a lot of content, like don't think that I'm constantly turned on for Hellenism like all the time. I'm always just like, let's go, let's make a million offerings. Like no, sometimes I do research because like I know that if I stop, like if I, you know, say, oh, I'm gonna post.
It's harder to get going again if you stop.
Right. So for me, like that's just, you know, a way that I keep going with research and YouTube, but I'm not always making a ton of offerings or making a ton of prayers. And just know that you're going to ebb and flow, and try to be compassionate with yourself about that. That can be hard, but just being like, you know, some days, some months even, you're only going to be like praying over your morning drink or praying while you wash your hands, and that's okay.
Or doing devotional activities, you know, like find something in your hobbies that you absolutely love to do and figure out which God you most strongly associate with it. Like wash your hands before you start and really focus yourself into immersing that connection with that deity. Devote what you are creating or doing to them. And you'll see how just doing that with the smallest things can completely transform your relationship with the gods. Even if you are making regular offerings, just try that. It is incredible. I have an entire video on devotional offerings. I also have one on votive offerings. That is something that I also want to mention is votive offerings can be incredibly powerful motivators to to worship, because for example, I tend to stick to the idea that votive offerings once given do not get used for anything else. You don't wear a necklace you gave to the gods, you don't wear a bracelet you gave to the gods, you don't use the cup that you gave to the gods ever again for anything. Because if you were to have been in ancient times, that votive offering would have been left in a temple and left to the priests to either use or destroy, right? But with our household altars, those offerings stay on the altar, and they sort of create this record of charis between you and the gods. So if you give votive offerings to commemorate things like recovering from an illness, or like a very beautiful thing that you made, that you created a mini version of or something to commemorate that, to thank the god for inspiring you, you can go to your altar when you're having a really hard time and see this display of all of these significant memories of significant moments that you felt so moved that you gave the god an additional offering, like a physical thing, just to recognize that. And you can see all of those things and be moved to realize that not only are the gods still with you, but recognizing the whole of that charis through these objects. That's something that we have that the ancients didn't.
That is,
and it can be really, really motivating. It is so powerful to stop and to look at that and go, holy shit, look at this incredible relationship I've built.
Yeah, I very much agree with that.
So, but as far as all of that goes, that's kind of where I'm at with these things. We're kind of at the last 10 minutes, which is usually when we start working on the shill portion. So do you have any projects that you've got upcoming that you want to tell my audience about?
My next video is going to be about Hestia. And then coming up in February, I'm going to be doing one on Aphrodite. And then coming up in March, I'm going to continue my Hecate series.
That's exciting.
Yes, I had to turn Hecate into a series.
Well, I mean, let's face it, how many topics do we divination's going to be a series. The video for this week on divination, I am doing one on divinatory ethics probably next month, and I've got videos scheduled for astrology, for divination by lots, for the actual oracles themselves, which I covered in depth in this video, but I want to really go in depth because there's so much information on them.
Right.
And there's another bit about modern divination and sort of the process of learning it and formulating questions that I want to go a deep dive into divinatory process and ritual construction and stuff, because there are so many different methods, different kinds of ritual structure work better for different kinds of divination. So I really want to help walk people through that. So videos breed, and they appear to be kind of like aphids in that they breed with themselves.
It's true.
Videos are born pregnant and they make more of themselves regardless of how you feel about them.
It's so true. So I have several deity videos coming up, which I know people tend to really like because it can be hard to there's no one book on Hestia. So, and there's not probably most of the videos on Hestia are probably a little bit, some of them can be a bit odd when they're not written. I don't know. Sometimes people take the myths and go a little bit wild for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's what's coming up with me.
I'm looking forward to that, because Hestia is such an essential part of worship, but she was also so worshipped, so widespread that she often gets mentioned as in the usual way, which for those of you who don't research things in Hellenism, that is a frustration that all of us feel for the way that authors refer to things that are so widespreadly done. They just assume that they know what you're talking about. It'd be like if you were an alien watching a TV show for the first time and you go see somebody use a toilet and you have no idea what the hell that thing is for, but they never actually show it in the show. It's just sitting there. So when they go in the bathroom, there's this thing sitting there and you're like, what the fuck is that?
Yeah.
And they just never feel the need to explain it because we all know what a toilet is. It's the same thing with certain practices. And Hestia is one of those where we know that first and last offering offerings were given to her in the home. But like, what does that mean? Does that mean a portion of every single offering was hers? Does that mean first and last libations, the way that a lot of us do? Does that mean that she gets a tiny piece of every single offering given to every god? Like, were offerings given all in a group to the gods? Like, did they just burn all of the thigh bones together with the fat and just like pray to all the different gods? Or like, did they toss each bone on the fire as they prayed to each god? Like, how was that done? We don't freaking know. We have no way to know. Yep. We will never know. We figure out how we do it ourselves, right?
Yep, basically.
But in the usual way, anybody who researches Hellenism, you say that and just pain. It is emblematic of so much pain.
Right, or sometimes they refer to frankincense as like, that good incense. That one incense that everyone loves. Probably
the incense that is every god. The incense one can give to every god, because frankincense, it is the incense that all of the gods love. However, Zeus in particular apparently really likes styrax. That's one of the few like anecdotes that I've seen, is that styrax goes to Zeus. But so for my video this week, I am doing a deep dive on divination. It is 41 minutes, 14 pages of script. Drove myself crazy. I did the dumb and read 9 monographs cover to cover because I hate myself. I've been working on this video for months, doing the research for it. I have cited all of the books that I went into. Unfortunately, like I said, it's spawned a whole bunch of baby videos that are all going to be sometime in the future. But I have officially transitioned from doing 10 to 20 minute videos to longer form content. Most of my videos are going to be a half an hour plus nowadays, and I'm transitioning down to doing just 2 of them a month. I want to give myself a little bit of time to work on my Common Hellenism book. So that's the big deal for me at the moment, is I'm trying to get Common Hellenism done so that a proper 101 book that covers most of everything you need to know to be a Hellenist without an overemphasis on magic or leaving out very key things that they constantly stress you have to do right. Hint, hint, laborious. What the fuck is the proper attitude for worship? You say it over and over and it's not there. I love that book for ritual and for practicality, but like, there's a lot of concepts that they just assume you know about because it was written for an organization, not for individuals. So like, there's a lot of problems with a lot of the 101 books. I'm really trying to push for that. I'm trying to get my own book done so that folks in my audience can have just sort of the confidence of, this is a place to start. Even if you don't do things the way that I do, here is a place to start where you've got rituals for most of the major holidays. You've got like structures, instructions for, here's how prayer was written in the ancient times, like, so you can write your own prayers. Here's a list of different ways that you can do offerings. Here's an in-depth guide to things like votive and devotional offerings. Let's talk a little bit about nymphs. Let's talk a little bit about all these things with suggestions for further reading so you can go do your own research or not. Here's enough that you can start. It's going to be about 400 to 500 pages. I have been working on it, but I really want to devote myself to it. And I'm also getting to the point on my channel where I've covered 101 so thoroughly that almost anything that I could talk about now is in the it's building on stuff category, which means that you have to talk about it for a lot longer because there's so much more to cover. Divination is a gigantic topic, and it feels like the perfect thing to launch on. It's a 5-part video. I am going to be dividing it into the 5 parts in the description so that you can kind of go back and watch stuff. It's who, what, when, where, why, how is how it's divided, who and where are put together. I'm incredibly proud of what I've made. I'm really looking forward to you all seeing it, but it's kind of indicative of where the channel is going for the future. Like, this is the very first video that I'm doing in this style, and I'm really excited to see where this goes. So, as far as pricing, the paperback is going to be depending on the printing cost, but like the ebook, I'm hoping to sell for, between $3 and $10, depending on how long it ends up being and how much like Amazon takes a cut for. I want the ebook to be accessible. I want people to be able to pick this book up and start practicing, because to be honest, I don't think that money should get between you and the gods. That's why all of my resources are free. That's why I don't gatekeep anything at all behind a paywall for my patrons. Patrons in the chat can confirm to you 100%, there is not a single bit of content, like actual educational content, that you cannot get access to that is locked behind a paywall on my Patreon. Not a single video. Even the Patreon bonus videos, they get them for a week and then they're on my channel. Like, I think that people should be able to access good quality, well-researched content. And I know Fel feels the same way.
I definitely do feel this. I am very passionate about about all of that. I was a youngin when the SOPA and PIPA laws were almost passed, which they were basically just some internet censorship and other stuff laws that were a giant mess. And I remember that, and I am a very passionate defender of making education and learning accessible for all.
Well, and like I said, that's why, like, the majority of what is in my book, like 90% of what's in my book, is on this channel. Like, it's going to be all in one place in my book. And there's going to be rituals and things, obviously, that I'm going to write specifically for the book that are going to be like examples and things. But everything that you need to know about, like, from the basic 101 level to start practicing, you can watch my Calvin Hellenism playlist right now. And the vast majority of basic 101 topics you need to practice Hellenism, I've already covered. Right? Like, you could do something similar with yours, Fel. Like, it's there. We already have it out there. It's just a matter of finding your footing and being confident. And I want to put it all in one place. That's what the book is for. It's not just a rehash of my scripts and things. It's actually, I'm writing a book from scratch. I was an author when I came into this community. That's what I do for a living. But, like, for as far as ebooks go, I'm self-publishing this because I do have a professional editor that I work with already, but I don't want a publisher to decide distribution and pricing and other things. I want to have that creative control, so I'm going to be distributing through Amazon primarily. But, like, the ebook version, ebooks don't cost me anything other than the time it took to write the book, and I care more about it being accessible to people than making money off of it. This is a love gift to the community in the same way the calendar was. So, like, I'm going to try to make that as accessible pricing-wise in ebook form as possible because I have to keep printing costs into account when I price the physical copy. But if you've got a Kindle or the Kindle app or an e-reader where you can, like, jailbreak the Kindle file, I want that to be an accessible price that most people could pay because most people have $5, right? Like, most people have between $5 and $10 and can afford a book like that, you know, briefly, even if you have to scrimp a bit. Most people can, and I want to make that as easily accessible as possible and put it all in one place. Like, that is, I love this community, and I want you all to be able to have that. And I think that the gatekeeping that's done in this community is frustrating and it's harmful because you shouldn't have to have a PhD to practice your religion.
Mm-hmm.
So, with that, thank you so much for coming on, Fel. Like, I hope to have you on sometime again in the future. Like, we can talk for fucking ever about everything, right? Like, I know that there's probably 50 other topics we could have gotten into. Is there anything else that you want to leave us off with before we sign off for the night?
I have a reward for everybody who stayed to the end. I just gotta grab him really quick.
Oh no! I have no idea what is happening. What is happening?
Here he is.
Oh, it's adorable. Hi, buddy. Oh, he has the squarest face.
I know. He's so tired. I just picked him up from his nap.
Aww. Luna is traumatized right now. She just got back from a weekend stay at the vet. We just found out that she's got thyroid problems and is diabetic. So she keeps crying up and down the hallway. That's why I kept having to mute in the middle. I kept calling her into the room because she's so anxious.
Oh yeah, Pumpkin just went into diabetic remission, so I feel you there. Diabetic cats are interesting.
The full title of the book is A Common Hellenism, Religion Without a PhD.
Good. I love that.
So if you guys are interested, I'm working on that. Patrons are getting updates regularly, like when I talk about when I work on it, that sort of thing. I will give you guys all more information when the book is finished. I'm hoping to get it out by June, but don't quote me on that because, well, Fel can attribute, like, you never know how deep a topic is when you start researching it. You never know how much of your soul a video is going to take. You never know what crazy thing is going to happen. Every time you make plans, ADHD steals them from you.
It's true. So true.
But, like, as far as, like, the end of this goes, if y'all are here, there's 49 of you who stuck to the end. Please drop down, hit the like button, drop down into the comments, not just the live chat. Let us know what you thought. Share your tips and tricks for neurodivergent, like, functioning within paganism. Like, share your encouragement with one another. Please be kind to one another, or just hit the dislike button so you never see my face again. Like, that just tells the algorithm you're not interested in my channel. And hey, the algorithm counts as engagement. So please do that. Thank you all for sticking to the end. And as I say at the end of every stream, we're stronger together. Thank you all so much for hanging out with me tonight. I will see you all in the Discord discussion under video discussions. Have a great night, everyone.